Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, worshippers of all ages, welcome to YouTube. My name is SeaRaptor, and today we're bringing you a first look at Tier 6 Premium Japanese Battleship Ise. Just a few days ago, we had a look over Tier 8 Hybrid Cruiser Tone, and today we're going to have a look at the other hybrid ship currently in testing, super testing, I should say, here on North America, and that is this Tier 6 battleship. This is Ise, and Ise is essentially, as you can probably guess if you're familiar with the Japanese battleship line, she is a variant of Tier 6 tech tree battleship, Fuso. Pretty obvious there by the superstructure, the hull layout, the forward guns. This is a Fuso-class battleship, but what's different, of course, is you've got all this mess on the stern. Now, Ise was an actual design. Like Tone, she was a real ship. This is not a paper design. They actually built and configured the ship in this fashion. So, I mean, we're working off real ships. If you're a proponent of real ships, this is something for you, man. Let me tell you. So yeah, let's have a look at this ship. I kind of talked about the hybrid concept a little bit in the other video. I'll touch on it briefly here. The idea being that you have a ship now that, of course, has at least a portion of the main battery that it would have historically, it is the main battery it historically had, but of course, being a modified version of the Fuso, those two stern turrets are missing. Those have been given up in exchange for this small flight deck that allows the ship to equip a small number of aircraft and a single aircraft squadron, similar to the way an aircraft carrier functions. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's go through the numbers. Let's have a look over the ship. First things first, survivability, 58,700 hit points. This is actually best in tier. Kind of nice to see. I mean, most Tier 6 battleships already have in the mid-50s. It's a pretty narrow spread, if we're honest, right? Most of them are like 54 to 59,000 hit points. And Ise is on the high end of that, but she comes in, kind of right where you'd expect. She actually has a few more hit points than her sister ship Fuso does, if we're honest. 26% torpedo protection, not best in tier, not worst in tier. It is lower than Fuso's 34% torpedo protection, so that's noteworthy. At the same time, this is a ship that you really, really hopefully aren't dealing very much in terms of, torpedoes, right? Like, we'll talk about more of that in a minute, but like with only 8 guns, you really don't want to be getting close, hopefully close enough where torpedoes are a real threat for you. Armor layout, have a look at this real quick. Her armor scheme is very similar to that of Fuso, as you would expect. She has this giant torpedo bulge running down the side of the ship here. And then you've got some belt armor. The belt configuration is a little different than Fuso's. Fuso has a 305mm belt. You see here Ise working on a 299mm belt. So we're not talking about a significant difference, but there is a difference. 200 millimeters of armor here, basically on just below the casemate, kind of the upper works, let's say. And she has this, like, this super mega awkward and weird. Let me see if I can show you this. Like, what is with this citadel space, right? Let's see. I mean, look at this thing. Like, what happened down here? There's all these different boxes and armor thicknesses, and I mean, this was an after magazine. This is obviously some kind of forward magazine, but man, this is just a really bizarrely designed Citadel box. I don't remember Fuso's looking this strange. She does have a little bit of a turtleback kind of going here. You can kind of start to see the angle here, a little bit of one. I'm not sure what thickness it is. Let's see if I can get the mouse in there. It looks like it's about a 32mm turtleback. So I don't know that you're going to get a lot out of that. And if you've played Fuso, you kind of know what I mean. She will take hits at angles that you're kind of like, wait, I ate full pens for that? Yeah, I suspect Ise's armor scheme will feel very similar. Maneuverability and concealment, 24.5 knots, 750-meter turning circle. These are more or less identical to Fuso. 14.8 rudder shift time is actually a little better than Fuso, or at least in the same ballpark. She's going to handle about the same. If you've driven a Fuso, ship's going to handle about the same. I don't think shouldn't be any surprises there. Concealment. This actually is a bit of a surprise. 15.8 on the surface, 9.8 aerial. These are base numbers without camouflage. The Ise you're seeing in port right now is naked because her camo in game is kind of bugged. She does come with a premium camo. She has a premium ship, but right now when you turn the premium camo on, the camo only appears on the turrets. That's it. Everywhere else on the ship, the camouflage does not appear. You get the benefits of it, but it doesn't look like you get the benefits of it because the entire rest of the ship is naked, just like you see it here. It's kind of strange looking. But anyway, I've just turned it off for the purpose of the video. So that is her base detection, no camouflage, 15.8. That's better than Fuso. I actually kind of wonder why this is. I mean, Fuso is widely known with this giant pagoda mass as being like the most detectable ship in her tier and like the 2 tiers on either side of her. And yet Ise, for some reason, gets a lower number. I'm not sure why that is, but there it is. Main battery. We'll talk about this real briefly because you will spend it when you play the ship. You will spend a decent chunk of time with the main battery. This is still Fuso. These are still Fuso's guns, Fuso's shells, Fuso's shell ballistics. It's basically the same thing, right? So if you played a Fuso, you know what you're getting into. There is one major difference, and I'll talk about that as we go through the numbers. Of course, she has 8 barrels. She's given up the 2 stern turrets, but these 8 turrets remain. I will throw up the guns graphic here real briefly so you can get a look at the turret angles, and I want to point this out, right? This number 4 turret here, if you're firing over the shoulder, if you're trying to kite with this ship, you're going to struggle to get this turret right here, turret number 4, into action. And when you kind of get down here and look into the model, you can kind of start to see why, right? Like, you've got all of this flight deck, these 2 catapults here. This is a mess, right? You have to swing this turret way wide, almost completely over the broadside of the ship, one way or the other, to get it into action. If you look at the turret angles, there is a very narrow window where this turret will fire, like, through, like, behind this catapult post. You know, there's maybe like a 4-degree window, 5-degree window through here that this turret will fire in this direction. Otherwise, you've got to get it all the way forward of this superstructure piece. The other 3 turrets, I don't think you'll have nearly as many struggles with. So, technically, you do have 8 barrels, but let's be realistic. In many situations, if you're pushing, let me back that up. If you're pushing, getting all 8 barrels into action is no problem. If you're kiting, you're retreating, getting all 8 barrels into action is actually quite a challenge. But again, these are the same shells, same guns. You know, if you've driven a Fuso, she's a pretty solid little ship. 14-inch guns, you know, they hit decently for most things in her tier bracket. So yeah, this is more of the same. Now, the big difference here, though, she has a little less range. You see that 21.4, Fuso's range 21.8, minor difference. She gets a small dispersion buff because she has a little less range. But the big thing, Fuso's guns operate on a 1.5 sigma. Right now, the way it's coded in the game, Ise's guns operate on a 2.0 sigma. That's really noteworthy. That is really noteworthy. What that means is, if you're not familiar with what that value means in World of Warships, sigma basically is how frequently do the shells cluster towards the center of the dispersion ellipse. Okay. Typically in World of Warships, battleships with more guns have a lower sigma. Basically, they vomit more shells into the dispersion ellipse, but they're more spread out. They're less consistent, all right? What Wargaming has done in Ise's case here is because they've removed these 2 stern turrets, and presumably at least in part because of the crappy angles on this 4th turret, they've made her guns a little more reliable in the main. Now, that's not perfect. You will still have salvos that completely go everywhere because battleship. But over the long haul, you know, several thousand rounds, Ise's guns will be more consistent than Fuso. Secondary armament, not much to write home about. Again, it's basically the same. Actually, no, they've stripped out the secondary turrets that are here in the casemate and replaced them with these 127mm turrets. I mean, 4-kilometer secondaries. There's nothing to write home about here, really. These are dual-purpose guns. You'll see these on her AA list as well. So yeah. Don't get into secondary combat with the ship and expect a whole lot. AA defense. So now this is actually something else that's noteworthy. You kind of started to see it there. Those 127mm dual-purpose guns start to give her a little more punch in this outer ring. You see there she puts up 6 flak bursts in the outer ring. That is 3 times as much flak as Fuso, and that's a lot of flak for a tier 6 ship. In fact, Ise is probably the best protected tier 6 battleship from aerial attacks in the game. It doesn't show up in the raw numbers, but when you factor in this is a lot of flak for tier 6, then yeah, there's a lot to like here. But the really interesting thing is these rocket launchers. Yep, that's right. Way back on the stern, she has rocket launchers. Now, if you've looked under the hood and had a look at HMS Hood over Tier 7, the British premium battleship, you've seen something like this. But now the Japanese have kind of their own anti-aircraft rockets here. Presumably, these also are contributing to her long-range aura, because her long-range aura, you see there, 165 DPS. That is a lot. That's a lot for Tier 6. And then she has a tremendous amount of the Japanese 25mm triples. They've just strapped these anywhere they could find or build an extra platform. These are all over the ship. So in the main, like, this ship is arguably the best protected anti-aircraft battleship at Tier 6. If you were to pair this thing up with maybe a Dallas, let's say, or some other kind of light cruiser in the tier bracket, she's going to be very difficult for Tier 6 carriers to really land home strikes on. I feel like, I mean, you'll be able to do it, but you're going to take losses. Like an enemy carrier, a Tier 6 carrier is absolutely going to take unpleasant losses. Let's say striking an Ise. Which brings us to the last little bit I want to talk about for the moment, and that is the aircraft. Now, if you've seen the Tone video from a couple of days ago, this will look familiar, because these are exactly the same planes that Tone mounts at Tier 8. Only now we're at Tier 6. So these at Tier 8, these plane health numbers, these torpedo numbers, they look kind of mediocre, right? But here at Tier 6, they start to look a lot better. 1670 you see there on the plane health. That's not too shabby for a plane that's going to be driving around, potentially torpedoing or bombing or rocketing, as the case may be, as these ships go through the test iterations. Other ships at Tier 5, let's say, that don't have meaningful anti-aircraft armament. You see there, she puts 3 planes into the air, 3 aircraft per squadron, so she only gets the 1 strike off, basically. 2 torpedoes on each plane, and you see there they remain the weak 2800 alpha damage, 35 knot kind of aerial torpedoes. She retains that 122nd aircraft restoration time, but because there's fewer planes in the squadron, Ise will have more opportunities than Tone to put these planes up over the course of a match and get something out of them, right? Because in order to regenerate her full squadron, she can do that in, 6 minutes instead of Tone's 8. So, yeah, that's noteworthy. Anyways, all the same conversation that I talked about in the Tone video about, having this early spotting capability, balancing that in a non-carrier game, all of that stuff still applies. So I talk a little more about that extensively in the Tone video. I won't go into it here, but yeah, I think Wargaming is still going to struggle a bit from a matchmaking perspective for a little while to kind of find out how impactful that early information, that early spotting is. I don't feel like the early damage is going to be significant. I mean, these torpedoes are pretty weak, but they are testing other variants of this ship that has both dive bombers and rocket aircraft as well. So those might be different in terms of their impact early, depending on the type of ordnance they take. Again, I'm looking mostly at the dive bombers, AP versus HE dive bombs. That can have a big impact even early in a match. Last thing let's talk about. Let's go look at her consumables. Nothing really shocking here, right? We've got a repair party and a damage control. That's it. Fuso would also ordinarily have access to a catapult aircraft, usually a spotter plane, but of course Ise does not have that. All those facilities have been removed in favor of the flight deck, and so yeah, no spotter plane, no spotter plane, no catapult fighter for Ise. Her anti-aircraft fire, as we talked about, good enough. The catapult fighter probably not all that necessary. And then she gets the regular things in the slots up here. There's nothing unusual on the list here for the various upgrades and so on. So yeah, there you go, guys. That's a quick first look over Ise. This is an interesting ship. I feel like the health and the striking power of the torpedo bombers on this ship make this a more attractive ship, a more interesting ship at Tier 6 than Tone is at Tier 8. At Tier 8, I feel like Tone, what she really brings is that early spotting, that early information, potentially that mid-game cross-map impact. Like, she can take one squadron somewhere else around the middle of the map and middle of the game and go be impactful. Okay. Tone here, by the fact that she'll put up a full squadron a little quicker than Ise will put up a full squadron a little quicker than Tone will, and that she's got just these planes will be harder for mid-tier ships to shoot down. I feel like gives her a little more this portion of the ship, this flight deck on the back, gives it a little more impact in a Tier 6 battle. We'll have to see as testing goes forward. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Wash your hands, be safe out there, and I'll catch you next time.